All right, welcome to Qualified at the Intersections Friday Roundup, coming to you from London, England. That's right. And so I normally like to do my Fridays live lately, but it's just not possible given the time change situation. I have to be up at 8 o'clock to do it, I think at noon Pacific time. So we're just going to talk about it. Handheld, no mic. Hopefully you can hear me okay. This week, so many things. Of course, there was Jimmy Kimmel getting back on air. I really can't emphasize this enough. It was not about Jimmy Kimmel per se. Jimmy Kimmel's a wealthy man. He was going to be fine. We all get that. It was about freedom of speech. And it was about if they can do it for him, to him, what are they going to do to the rest of us? And as I talked about yesterday in my newsletter, there were certain leverage points we could push for that. That is, we could cancel Hulu, we can cancel Disney, we could have a real economic impact on the key player and one of the key decision makers, right? Helping them get a backbone so they could fight back. But the bottom line is the administration targeted an individual comedian for censorship. And that stands alone as a problem. That doesn't negate the issue that came up with Laura Loomer and Jasmine Crockett. As many of you know, Laura Loomer called Jasmine Crockett a black bitch. And this is the type of derogatory statement that black women hear from white people and white women when people are trying to undermine and degrade you. The fact that she is a trusted advisor to the President of the United States. In fact, she makes the decisions apparently about who keeps a job in the White House in the inner circle, who loses a job. So the comparison between y'all helped Jimmy Kimmel, but you didn't help Jasmine Crockett, that's a straw man. That's a faulty comparison because Donald Trump in this case is the Hulu and the Disney. And he got up at a funeral and said, I hate my opponents and I do not wish them well. So we can email the White House, we can complain, but he has made it clear he don't give a F. Okay, so he is not the leverage point. He would be the leverage point under any other administration where he would be the one to censure her or remove her, but he's not. And we're dealing with a situation where this administration is clearly trying to recast racially derogatory conversations as free speech and any speech that contradicts that as hate speech. And they are doing that right in our faces. As the young people say, they are playing in our faces directly. And so what we have to figure out is what is the leverage point for him? Because Laura Loomer is just a symptom of him. That she is allowed any space in our public life is a result of who he is, who J.D. Vance is, what they believe. And to call a black woman a black bitch that's just a difference of opinion. That's just a different language. I guess she's debating the right way, right? So we're in a bit of a bind when it comes to what the leverage point to make change with her is. So it's a totally different leverage point than it was with Jimmy Kimmel. And there'll be other different leverage points, right? So I have talked about yesterday in the newsletter about SHRM, the Society of HR Managers. They are platforming Robbie Starbuck, who has what I think is a eugenicist view of black intelligence and ability, who has no certification, no education, no skill, and yet they are platforming him as a speaker. Well, we do have a leverage point there. We can en masse cancel our SHRM memberships. We can talk to our corporations and tell them, look, we shouldn't have to have those certifications. There are other certifications. We can call our local SHRM membership and say, as long as you're doing this, we are withholding dues and we do not want any trainings you provide us. Now that is a leverage point. And that leverage point can help black folks in the workplace right now. Then we have the issue of the 300,000 plus black women who've lost jobs, plus the almost double black unemployment rate. Well, we have a leverage point in the sense that we can come together and do our own conference and discussion about what is going on. And then the other leverage point we have is our protest. And we have not yet in this country had a universal strike as they've had in other countries. And we must get to the point where we have a bunch of rights organizations come together. It can't be hodgepodge. It has to be 1 day solid strike or 2 days solid strike. And we have to acknowledge the fact that some people, for economic reasons, have to go to work. How can we support each other? But we have to come up with some kind of strike, because that is the only way you can let a dictator or a fascist know that you don't agree with what they're doing. So these are the different kind of leverage points, right? The other thing I talked about this week is 1 in 4 professors in the American South are trying to leave. They are full of fear. They are unable to teach. They are feeling constricted. They are worried. They don't want to be there. Now, I would argue, considering UC Berkeley gave the White House basically a McCarthyistic list of people who they think are anti-Semitic, including a Jewish lesbian, that the North might not be that much better, kind of just like during slavery, really, but they don't want to be in the South. That means that young people in the South are going to get a very specific type of education, and we are going to be dealing with a populace, large portions, Florida, Texas, and Oklahoma, who are going to be taught a revisionist version of history that reestablishes white supremacy and reestablishes inferiority of everybody else by implication. And the consequences of that are long term. They're 100 years. And so, you know what that means? I don't think it means good things. I tell you what, I think if Democrats ever get back in power, as I've said in my newsletter this week, they're going to have the guts to use the tools that have been used thus far. In other words, there is no reconciliation with fascism. They're going to have to move swiftly and decisively to reestablish dignity, equity, and fraternity in this country. And that is going to look like exercising and utilizing the power that is being utilized right now. And I know we don't like to talk about that. We want to bring back norms. We are so far from the sea shore. We are constantly going to be fighting a fascist threat in this country now that has been unleashed. And we are going to have to try to put ironclad guardrails in if we are ever back in power. And that means we're going to have to spend a lot more time than we currently do organizing. Yes, I know people say they're going to try to steal the vote, and maybe they will, but we have to show overwhelming force, an overwhelming majority to show that we are displeased. And this is the only thing we really have, but we saw with the Disney thing that overwhelming force can work, that we can work together, and we have to find more pressure points around how we can do that. The other thing that came up this week was the hiding of slavery's true cost. You know, they're removing certain information about slavery, saying it wasn't that bad, removing pictures showing the true brutality, saying that's inflaming, you know, ideology, that Prager University says it was better than dying, being enslaved. Well, a lot of slaves died. They committed suicide, they drowned themselves, and on the way here they threw themselves off the boat. So apparently it wasn't better than dying. But the main thing I want to ask is, how are they going to hide the DNA evidence? Because, baby, I am the DNA evidence. Most African Americans hold about 20% white ancestry due to systematic rape and slavery. So how are you going to hide the DNA evidence? Okay, so the DNA evidence tells us that slavery was not a benign institution. It was an institution of sexual exploitation as well as physical exploitation. So we have to be comfortable talking about that. We have to put that up front. Next week, I'm going to talk more about employment in Black folks, because it is a primary concern of mine. It is why I wrote my book, because I could see several years ago where we were headed. And I knew that once Donald Trump was nominated, that it was only going to accelerate. And I do have some ideas about what we can do, but we have to get after it. And we have to use our leverage points. I am very glad Jimmy Kimmel's back on the air, not because I want Jimmy Kimmel to have a job, because like I said, Jimmy Kimmel's wealthy, he's going to be fine, but because it proved that there is some stopgap. Now, is he going to be on indefinitely? Who knows? I mean, Donald Trump is the key of petty. He gets up at the United Nations and talks the most insane, disgusting, insulting conversation to the rest of the world while he's restricting free speech. While I just read about a woman who didn't have insurance and had a $98,000 bill for a broken arm. How dare you get up and lecture other people, you know? So the Roundup is a little truncate it because I don't have my usual space. And like I said, I generally like to go live lately, but we will be back live next Friday. And Monday, we're going to talk a little bit more about Black unemployment. So from London, this is the Friday Roundup.